Hello, welcome to the IELTS multi-step program. Today we're going to be shooting a reaction video to a speaking test that was conducted by a native English speaker and someone from Asia. In this reaction video, we will be giving comments and reviews on the person's performance and also pointing out the flaws and the mistakes that this person has made in this particular test so that you can avoid it when it's your turn. Before we begin, I'd like to go over the assessment criteria for the speaking test in the IELTS so that we are all on the same page as to what we're going to be looking out for in this performance. The first and most important criteria for the IELTS speaking test is fluency and coherence. Fluency simply means, do you speak in a fluent way that is easy to understand? And for coherence, this simply refers to the fact that you link your ideas together clearly. The second important criteria for the speaking test in the IELTS is lexical resource. And what does that mean? Can you accurately use or attempt to use a wide range of vocabulary accurately and effectively? And this is where the challenge comes for a lot of test takers. They use it accurately, but they do not use it effectively or convincingly. The next criteria for the speaking test is grammatical range and accuracy. Can you use a wide range of grammatical structures rather than repeating basic structures? Are your sentences accurate, or do you often make grammatical mistakes? And finally, the last assessment criteria for the speaking test in the IELTS is pronunciation. It simply means, is your spoken language clear and easy to understand? Do you use stress and intonation to add meaning? With individual words, do you use stress accurately? Now, this could be a major challenge for a lot of non-native speakers of the language, but is the reason why it's the last or the least important criteria in the test. So, without further ado, let's get right into this test and see if you can avoid mistakes that this test taker made that landed them at a band 6.5.
Could you tell me your full name, please?
My name is Min-seok Kim.
Min-seok Kim.
Yes, it spells out as M-I-N-S-E-O-K-K-I-M.
Okay, Min-seok Kim. Good. And do you like your name?
I think I like my name. My grandfather gave it to me. There were some candidates for my names.
So the first thing that you would notice in this test taker's response is that it seems to be at ease, and that's a very good thing to be. When you're taking the IELTS speaking test, I would advise you as much as possible to find a zone where you're comfortable. Now, the first error that we notice in his response is that he used vocabulary inappropriately. He said that he likes his name and that when his grandfather gave him that name, there were a lot of candidates for his name. The word that was supposed to be used there would be options. Candidates refer to human beings, and options will refer to inanimate things or even human beings also too. So using the word candidates for the other options or for the other choices of names that his grandfather had when he chose that name obviously accounted for his low score in lexical resource.
But one of them was same as previous president of Korea, so my grandfather disagreed.
Okay.
So he said Min-seok is better than the other one, so he gave me this name.
Okay. And are you working or are you a student?
I'm a student in Australia, studying in university, marketing and majoring in marketing.
Okay. And do you like your course?
Yeah. For the course itself, I like it, but sometimes I meet some strange professors or lecturers, but I do enjoy my major.
Okay.
So, people often ask, is there a level where I get too informal in my language in the test? And I tell them that it is relative. For some people, their natural communicative mode is being informal and laid back. For some people, they're all uptight and formal. But for this test taker here, you would notice that almost all the responses that he has been given, and that's like 3 or 5 now, start with the expression when it becomes repetitive, when it becomes too much, it starts to affect the flow of his communication. Another problem that you would see him having is that he has the wrong structure for his sentences. So in his response to the question about what he's doing and where he said he's in Australia, he's a student studying in Australia and majoring in marketing, he just jumbled up all those things. There was no logical arrangement to the pieces of information in those expressions. And I can see why the examiner would have awarded a band 6.5 to this test taker.
And tell me about what you do when you have some free time.
When I have free time, I have my own YouTube channel. So I film with my friend, so after that I edit those videos and upload it on YouTube. And for daily hobbies, I go to gym to work out.
Okay.
So, in the comment section for this video, there were a lot of negative comments asking why this person got a band 6.5, and that's understandable. You would notice that his pronunciation seems to be quite close to near native status or even native English speaker status, which is very commendable also. And you would also notice that beyond the vocabulary errors that he's making, he also has a good grasp of the English language. So why would I say that? The word daily hobbies would not come to someone who isn't quite proficient in the use of English language. He was able to distinguish between the hobbies that he performed on an occasional basis and the ones that he did regularly, which is daily, like going to the gym. So that might also throw up some question as to, could this test taker have gotten a better result or a higher band? Let's see.
And could you tell me about your hometown?
My hometown is called Daegu. It's located at the southern part of Korean Peninsula. And I moved to Seoul when I was 6, but I still visit there once a year to visit my relatives.
Okay. Okay, now we're going to talk about jeans. So, do you wear jeans often?
Yeah, most of my pants are jeans.
Yeah, again, all the time. So I tell my test takers who I tutor, I tell them, please avoid the word yeah. If you're going to say yes, just say yes. The IELTS is not a place for you to show off that imported foreign accent that you have. Please, as much as possible, try to keep it formal, try to keep it official. Those little errors would count against you when the examiner is totaling your scores.
I think after like 10 years old, I only wore jeans mostly. I think it's very comfortable and it matches almost every upper clothes. But sometimes, like if I have to wear formal clothes and wear like formal pants, I feel uncomfortable already.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you like wearing jeans?
Yeah, I love wearing jeans now.
Okay, very good. And why do you think jeans are popular?
I think I've learned this in my schools and I've read some articles about it. And I heard that jeans were popular when it was first invented, and rich people thought even the poor were wearing those pants, and at first rich people thought that, oh, how could those people wear the same clothes as us? But I think that represents that all the people, from every people's perspective, jeans looks okay and very...
From every people's perspectives, obviously that is the wrong expression. Everybody's perspective, every person's perspective, every individual's perspective is a much better option to use in that place. Another challenge that I have there is the word people being repeated like 3 or 4 times in the same stretch of expressions. It sort of sounds off to the ear. So these are the little errors that we make unconsciously that affect our scores in the IELTS. Please, as much as possible, avoid these errors.
Fashionable. So I think I'm also part of those people, I guess.
Okay. And what color jeans do you like wearing?
I thought like for 5 years ago, I only bought like black jeans, but only
In the past 5 years, I've only bought black jeans. For the past 5 years, I've only been buying black jeans. For the past 5 years, I've only bought black jeans. What he said right now is the wrong expression. In the past 5 years, he didn't say in the past 5 years. In the 5 years ago, I only buy black jeans. So you start to see evidence of why candidates attract the kind of scores that they do get in the IELTS, even though it's something as easy and as basic as a speaking test.
recently I have bought 2 very light blue jeans. I thought those colors didn't match me, but
So I've only bought 2 very light blue jeans. I thought those colors didn't match me. Colors do not match you. They either suit you, or they make you look good, or they make you look bad. Another evidence of the wrong use of the right word.
I age more. I think it's not too bad, I guess.
Okay. And what style of jeans are popular in your country?
Only a few years ago, very skinny fit jeans were popular, but some people thought it was a bit.
I like that. I like the fact that he was able to link his answer to a past time frame, and we'll see if we'll be able to now extend it by doing it in the present and also talking about how that concept or that thing would happen in the future. That would be a very good use of the timeline format for this particular question. And you can see that you use the correct tense there also too, which means that his grammar, although might be shaky, isn't so bad.
I would say disgusting. When it's too tight, they thought it looks like sausage. But these days, I think the trend is that it's a bit loose pants is more popular these days.
Okay. All right. That will do us for part 1 of the test.
Yep.
So you could see that he went ahead and he extended, at least he did 2 time periods in that part. He did in the past and he did in the present. And I think he handled that quite well. That was a quite good response there. And that is the end of the part 1 of the speaking test. Overall, you would see that his performance hasn't been so bad, but there are errors that someone who isn't that competent would overlook. But that's the challenge here. You see, the examiners who would be sitting in front of you on the day of the IELTS test are trained and they are competent, and they don't look out for this kind of errors. So avoiding this type of errors will go a long way in ensuring that you get your desired score in the IELTS. Okay, so let's move on to the part 2 of the test now. Here is called the long turn, and we'll see how he handles himself in responding to a question for an extended period of time. Here, I'm probably sure that things like fluency, coherence would play a much more bigger role here.
Okay, so let's move on to the second part. We get. Yeah, let's look at this question. Okay, so I'll give you the question. There you go. I'll give you a pen there.
Thank you.
Okay, so now, I'll give you 1 minute to make some notes and do some preparation. So you can begin. All right, Vinsok, that's where your minute is down there. Please grab that pen back off you, please.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you. Right, so your question is describe your ideal home. So you can begin anytime you like.
Okay, I think for me, ideal home would be apartment. I think
Maybe I misheard, but I think both of them pronounced the word ideal incorrectly. So the examiner said ideal home, and he said it's an idea home. So obviously this will count against him. These are basic words that they expect that you should be able to pronounce. So as much as I will tell you that your accent isn't going to be a huge factor in your success or failure, try as much as possible to ensure that the English words, the common words, the basic ones that you're pronouncing are as clear and as understandable as you can make them.
The reason why I chose this form of home is because
This form of home obviously should be what? This type of home, this kind of home. This form of home doesn't actually convey the actual meaning that he's trying to pass across. In the IELTS, vocabulary will make or mar you. Say exactly what you mean to say.
in Korea, because the land field is small, most of people build apartment for their.
In Korea, the land field is small. So that's wrong. Because what was he trying to express there? The physical land that they have, the actual places where they can actually build houses, where they can actually cultivate, where people can actually live, is quite small. The land area is quite small, not the land field.
Houses, and I've lived in apartment for most of my life, so I think this is why I chose this as my ideal home. And I think it should be located near public transportation. I think that's the most important thing, because let's say I'm studying or have a job, commuting is the most important thing for me, I guess.
I like that. Commuting is the appropriate vocabulary. And there's one other thing in the description for the assessment criteria lexical resource. Here it says, can you explain your ideas even if you do not know a particular word? Very important criteria. And finally, it says, can you use or attempt to use higher level vocabulary accurately? Commuting is higher level vocabulary. Instead of transporting, instead of going to and fro, instead of moving, he said commuting. I like that. And I also like the reason that he gave for choosing an apartment. One of the criteria, one of the things that his ideal house would have, or his ideal home would have, would be that it will be close to public transport. As a Lagosian, that's something that I can identify and can relate with.
So maybe near bus station or subway station would be nice. And I think for my home, it should be first cozy, and secondly, it should be equipped with lots of furnitures and other facilities.
Lots of furniture, I think. Furniture wouldn't take an S, yes, so that would probably also count against him. But you would notice that in the part 2, it seems to have a better grasp of the test. His fluency is on point, and he seems to be able to use those particular high-level vocabulary words that would probably land him a very good score. So I'm waiting to see why he landed at a band 6.5, because so far I do not see the mistakes of part 1 affecting this response so much that he wouldn't get beyond a band 6.5.
And I would say it's better if there's like gym or swimming pool at the apartment for public use. And for this home, I would say it doesn't have to be big, because I would live there for my 20s. But once
I would live there in my 20s, not for my 20s. Okay.
I marry or get a kid, maybe I would move to a bigger apartment.
Do you get a kid or do you have a kid? I think that was the wrong collocation to use for that particular expression.
And if I can, I would like to live near Seoul at least, since it's the most popular area in Korea.
Okay, right, good. That's 2 minutes. So we'll stop you there. Very good, very good. So you think location is very important about
Yes.
a house?
Location.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You're not a fan of commuting?
Yes, it's very hard to be in the packed subway when everyone is pushing each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a war, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, good stuff. We'll go on to part 3 now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, his part 2 generally is, I think, is probably the best part of his test so far. I haven't watched part 3, so I wouldn't know, but I think so far he proved himself to be quite competent in his use of language in this part 2. I like the fact that he was able to use or attempt to use high-level vocabulary. And I also like the fact that he was able to speak for 2 minutes. That's quite a long stretch of time, and that's the maximum period of time that you will be expected to speak in the IELTS speaking test. So obviously we'll see why he later landed at about 6.5, because for me right now he's looking more like a band 7. So we've come to the end of the part 2, which is the long turn of the speaking test, and we'll be moving on into the part 3 now, which is the discussion aspect of the test. Here, abstract questions derived from the topic that was talked about in part 2 will be asked, and the candidate will be expected to give answers from a general perspective as opposed to just their personal experiences.
Hey. So, just to get the clock going again. So yeah, what do you think? What are the differences between living in the city and living in the countryside?
So for currently I'm living in Australia, and the city is Canberra. And I would say, even though it's capital city, it's more countryside than Seoul, I guess, because when I come out of my room, I can see the kangaroos running around.
So, for me, this is something I always stress for test takers. In the part 3, direct answers first, expansion after. Direct answers first, illustration after. Direct answers first, examples after. The question was, what do you think are the differences between living in the city and in the countryside? Instead of jumping straight to I live in, it would have been better for him to give actual response to that question. So what is different, or what are the differences about living in the countryside and the city? Oh, the noise, the population, the pollution, and then you go ahead to use yourself as an example to illustrate that point. That is the appropriate format for answering questions in the speaking part 3. So here you would see that he didn't use that format, and also he had some errors also in word usage and vocabulary usage also too.
But I think there's advantages and disadvantages for living in city and countryside. For city, I would say it's very convenient for everything, since...
And now he does that. Now this is a chance that you cannot take. So your examiner is has the power to rudely interrupt you at any given point in time. As long as he gets the things that he needs to assess your communicative competence, he can tell you to move on. So what if the examiner doesn't give you the opportunity to give such a robust answer, or to get to this point? You would have been considered not to have answered that question. That is a risk that you cannot take. So always put your best foot forth, first, and then answer the questions first before you give an explanation.
Everything is prepared already, but I would say it's very packed, and sometimes you want to be by yourself, but there are a lot of people around you, so I think it's hard for you to get like personal zone. But for
I like that. He seems to have an idea, and he seems to probably live, he lives in Australia, obviously, or he's schooling in Australia, so he has an idea of how the native English speaker uses language, and that's working well for him. But and one other thing that I like about his responses is that for his grammatical mistakes, anytime he makes those grammatical mistakes, he usually corrects himself. So when he says something like is and he's supposed to use are, he backtracks and he corrects himself. But the errors that he's making in vocabulary are the ones that he seems to be affecting him or weighing him down.
Countryside, I think that's very easy. Like you want to be alone and you want some of your private time. It's very easy for you to just go out of your room and walk around. But I would say for countryside, yes, it's opposite from the city. Everything is a bit uncomfortable.
Okay, okay, good, good. And do you think older people prefer living in the countryside rather than the city?
Yes, I agree with this statement because...
Now this is the perfect format for answering the question, which I mentioned earlier. Direct answer first, and then he gives the reason, or he gives the illustration, or he gives an example after. Do you think ABC prefers living in the countryside? And he goes, yes, I agree, because that is the perfect way to answer questions in the part 3, because you cannot gamble on the chance that the examiner will allow you to expand.
Older people, especially from Korean perspective, I've heard a lot of older generation saying that after retiring, they would like to go back to countryside and run their own farm. I think that's because they care more about their health issue. They want to breathe in some
health issues, okay,
more clean air and live among the nature. I think that's why.
Live among what? Nature. There was no need to put the article the in front of nature in that response.
Okay, good. And do younger people feel differently? They wouldn't like to live in the countryside?
I think they want to be exposed to more technologies and more comfortable living area. So, as I said before, commuting and transportation.
Now, I'm impressed. So, one of the things I really like that a test taker does in the speaking test is when you use referencing. So when you've talked about something before and then you need to refer to it and you can handle that in a perfect way, I think it impresses me. So when he said, like I mentioned before, or like I said earlier, and this is something he said way back in section 2, which means that he's following the conversation with his mind and his communicative competence is quite high. So the jury is still out on why this guy is at a band.
Is very important factors for them, and they need to get access to their working field very easily.
Get access to their working field? No, working field doesn't really say what he wants to say there.
I think that's why younger people prefer to live in the city.
And in your country, is the public transportation in the countryside efficient and well connected?
For some of the cities, I would say it's well connected. But if you go into very countryside, very rural area, I would say.
So you see, if you go to very countryside, and then he corrected that by saying into very rural areas. Even though I still wouldn't go with very rural areas, but at least he was able to correct that error. And that's something that a lot of test takers fail to do. So you make a mistake, and the next thing you do is you get stuck. Just move on. Or if you do know the correct thing, say it and move on. Do not interrupt your response with sorry. A lot of Africans do this when they make mistakes. No, you do not need to do that. Just say the right thing and move on.
There are like only one buses an hour.
One buses?
So I think it's not that convenient compared to city.
Do you think governments should spend more money focusing on smaller towns and areas?
I think government is putting a lot of effort in public transportation because Koreans ourselves thinks that Korean public transportation is very well organized. And I think the reason why public transportation isn't that developed compared to cities because the government thinks that it's already enough for countryside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Good. And do you think, these days, because public transportation has improved a lot, do you think fewer people drive their own cars these days?
I think it depends on the age group. For older generation, they usually feel scared driving around, especially in Seoul, because
Wouldn't it be better if you had said for the older generation than for older generation? Minor grammatical error, but could affect.
the driving, I mean, the traffic in Seoul is very popular for being notorious. But for younger generation,
The traffic in Seoul is very popular for being notorious. Or the traffic in Seoul is notorious for being, maybe really bad.
they can drive and they have enough money to purchase their own transport. So whenever they go out, even the close distance, I think they prefer taking their own car.
Okay, very good, very good. Yeah. And do you think, in general, Korean people feel like their public transportation could be improved in any way?
I personally take subway when I go to my workplace.
I take the subway.
And during the rush hour, it's like being in a hell. It's so crowded and everyone is pushing each other. And I was thinking, living in Australia, I've seen 2-story subway. So maybe I thought Seoul government or City Hall could think about making 2-story subway or a bit longer subways in order to put in more people inside.
Not a bad response, even though he struggled with the words or the vocabulary that he wanted to use to express what he wanted to say there. But it's not a bad response. His thoughts, the ideas are quite coherent, but you would discover that it's a different thing to have an idea and a different thing to have the words to express your idea. You could see that he had to resort to using non-verbal cues there when he wanted to respond, because I think he was already stuck.
But other than that, I think it's quite well organized.
Yeah, good idea. All right. Yeah, so let's get into the feedback now, yeah. So it was a good test, you did well, you're nice and confident, you spoke fluently, yeah. I'd say your score would be about 6.5, I would say, what you would get. Now, to get up to 7.0, I think the only thing that's really kind of stopping you probably is just some small grammar errors kind of throughout, So in terms of your fluency, it was really good. There was very little hesitation throughout. You were able to speak comfortably and you answered all the questions on the spot. Really good, really good. As was your pronunciation, very clear, very accurate. There were no real issues to point out there. So yeah, fluency, pronunciation, really good, quite good, possibly like above 7. Obviously there's a few vocabulary issues. Let's just point out a couple, just to give some examples. You were talking about your name.
Yes.
Yeah. And you said there were a few other candidates for your name.
I mentioned that
candidates
earlier.
suggest to me like people. Like presidential candidate would be a different person. But if you're talking about a name, I would say options. There were a few other options, but you chose Minsuk. Okay, good. Use the word as well, disgusting for the jeans. I probably wouldn't use that word for jeans. Disgusting sounds just a little bit worse, a little bit extreme in that sense. For example, when you're talking about food, like really bad food, you would say disgusting, or something that would make your stomach feel bad. Yeah.
I necessarily do not agree with that. I think a word is just a word, really. If that's how he feels about tight jeans, really tight jeans, of course, then he can't use the word disgusting. I haven't had other challenges or other problems with his vocabulary used than what he's mentioning. But all in all, you have a very good idea of why he landed at the band 6.5. So for the individual areas, criteria like fluency and coherence, he scored above 7. For pronunciation, obviously, he scored above a band 7. But for lexical resource, looking back at the video and seeing all the places where I mentioned words that he used inappropriately or not as effectively as he should have used them, he wouldn't score above a band 6.5 for lexical resource, and same with the grammatical accuracy also too. Even though he was able to correct himself every time he made most of those errors, not every time, but a lot of times when he made errors in grammar, he corrected himself. There were still some really big gaps where he could have done better, and that would have also landed him at a band 6.5 or a band 6. So overall, if you look at the average of that, if you score above a band 7 or a 7 in 2 places and you score below a band 6.5 in 2 other places, you can possibly land at a band 6.5. So I would say this is a fair assessment for this test, and I'll also implore you to please watch and rewatch the video again to understand the places where you do not need to make those kind of mistakes, so that you can actually secure that desired band 8 or band 9 for the speaking test in the IELTS.